Hey, thanks so much for tuning into another episode of the Christian Indie Artists and Songwriters podcast. I'm your host, Brian, and on today's episode, we're going to talk about music production, and more specifically, my personal music production journey. But before we jump into that, I'm so excited to announce that our music production course, Logic Pro X for Artists and Songwriters, is live now. And as of the release of this episode, August 13th, 2021, this is the final day of our launch where we're offering a huge discount, the biggest discount that we will ever offer on this course. If you're interested at all to check it out, click the link below where you can find all the details and see if it's a good fit for you. In the course, we walk through every step of the production process, all the way from setting up our initial Logic session, all the way to doing our final master bounce. And that includes everything from programming pads, to recording scratch track, to program piano, recording drums in a couple different ways, doing synth bass and electric bass guitar, adding acoustic guitars, electric guitars, doing additional synth pad layers, and then recording vocals, also mixing, mastering, and then doing the final bounce. So we cover every step of the process, building a song literally from scratch all the way through. So if you're interested in that, like I said, click the link below. And we believe in the transformational power of this course so much that we've made the vocal module absolutely free, and it's called Record Your Vocals Like a Pro. Check the link below. You get instant lifetime access to that. And whether you decide to upgrade to the full course or not, the vocal module is yours forever to learn from and dig into. So please click the link below and enjoy that. So now for this episode, like I mentioned, I kind of wanted to dig into my personal production story. I bet you that on your journey, we have a lot of things in common, and maybe you haven't even started your journey yet, but my hope in this is that you will see that you can do this. And I want to encourage you that there's no greater time than in history to be creating music, especially from home. In the past, unless you had a huge budget and a full band and management and a lot of times a record label behind you, it'd be nearly impossible to get music out to the masses. Just to go to the recording studio alone would cost thousands upon thousands of dollars. And that doesn't even take into consideration the marketing aspect and the distribution aspect. But now, we can literally create music from our home studio, record it, mix it, master it, create our own artwork with great graphic design apps like Canva, upload it to a digital distributor like DistroKid, CD Baby, or TuneCore, release it to the world, and make actual impact, real impact with our music. And I've got to hear so many great stories of people who've been impacted by the music that I've been a part of. And I know chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, you want the same exact thing for your music. So I just wanted to walk through my story and my process of kind of how we got to where we are now, where I am a full-time music producer, songwriter, and artist. So for me, I started writing music when I was just a teenager, when I was about 14 years old. I just felt like I needed to get things out, and song, lyric, and melody was the way that I did that. Now, I will say, when I was 14 years old, I didn't have much to say. I would just be influenced by the bands that I loved, and I would try to write really cool, poetic sounding things that honestly didn't make a lot of sense, but they sounded cool to me. So that's when I started writing songs, when I was in just about middle school, high school aged, and I had a band. And I was in that band for about 8 years, and we would travel all around Florida, and it was great. It was me and my friends. We lived in Orlando for a while. We got to enjoy that part of doing the band thing, traveling around, and it was amazing. And it was terrible, but that made it amazing. So I don't know if you've experienced that, doing the band thing, but it's something that I totally treasure and would never trade it for anything. And I love that. And a side note, that band is actually what led me to meet Susan, my wife. So that was the greatest gift of all through that process. So after the band, we would go up to this great studio in Jacksonville. It was this place called Vision Sound Studios. I don't even know if it's around anymore, but it was the place, if you've heard of the band Red Jumpsuit Apparatus, that was where that band was discovered and signed and eventually went on to do great things. But we would drive up to Jacksonville a couple times a year and record EPs, and it was such a fun process. But there was a big ticket price with that, and as a band, we would just collect all of our money. Literally, I remember one time we went up there and we had a bunch of cash in a shoebox, and it was very cinematic and probably should have done it a different way, but it was amazing. And that started that whole thing, or we would record music and we would go up there with nothing and we'd come home with a 5 or 6 song EP on a CD. And it was the greatest thing. I listened to those things thousands of times. I still have all that music. I still love that music. Now, of course, it's all digitally on my computer, but I still love and so thankful for all of that music and all of those stories. So after that, as bands often do, we just sort of went through a bunch of lineups, and it was always my friends, but we eventually kind of dissolved, and we just decided that, hey, we've kind of taken this as far as we feel like we can go. Now what? But through this whole time, I'm still writing songs. Through this whole period, I still feel compelled to just write and create. But at this time, I really hadn't dug into any production. It was kind of relying on others to help do that. And they were great, skilled. I remember those engineers. They were some awesome people who really created some amazing sounds for the band. But then I found myself in a place to where I wasn't really in a band anymore, but I still had a lot of ideas and I still really wanted to get those ideas out. So I had a computer. And I started trying to understand, how could I make music in this Dell computer? I didn't have Pro Tools, I didn't have Logic, I didn't have anything. I just had this older Dell computer. So I started trying to look online. And this is a few years ago, so it was not nearly as readily available as it is now. So I ended up finding, I honestly feel like it was Audacity or some like really primitive kind of recording software. And I didn't have a microphone or anything or headphones at all. I would just literally try to start recording sounds in using anything I had. I had an acoustic guitar, so I would just like record into like a little like lavalier mic or something. And it was terrible and it was atrocious. However, that was the first time I'd started recording my own stuff in my own place. And this is back in, I'd say 2006 is when this kind of started for me. So fast forward a few years, I got my first Apple computer. And it had this incredible little program on it called GarageBand. And it was just a little amp icon with a little guitar next to it. And once I opened that honestly kind of changed everything. But I didn't even know it at the time. So this was back in 2009, 2010. And I remember that might have been for Christmas or something. Susie actually bought me this M-Audio recording kit from a company called Musician's Friend. I don't even know if they exist anymore. I use Sweetwater now for everything, but Musician's Friend, if you're still out there, you're awesome. Thank you for what you did. It was one of the first like major online music stores. So I had this M-Audio recording kit, which had like a couple of monitors. It had a large diaphragm condenser microphone, and it had a interface, which had like 2 channels. There was no preamp. It was just like a box that would basically take a microphone plug, and then you could plug a USB in your computer and actually record sound into your computer. So with that, and then GarageBand, I was able to start recording basic acoustic demos, which was just to a click, one guitar, one vocal. But I was amazed that I could actually finally start to communicate these ideas that have been in my mind. And we all have tons and tons of phone recordings into our phone that's like work tapes and stuff, and those are great and those are necessary, but sometimes there can be certain elements lost just because you're still learning the song, whatever the case may be. But with GarageBand, I was finally able to actually translate and work on the song itself. So this really started something for me. And after I had a bunch of those acoustic demos, I was like, well, there's all these other instruments, so can I start programming other elements and layers? So of course you can do all that. And I didn't have a MIDI controller or anything. So I was basically like grabbing samples, dragging them into the session, and then just sort of moving notes around until it followed the progression. And fast forward a few years, I started doing that more and more frequently and started kind of building out bigger arrangements and even programming some drum parts. And again, I didn't have a MIDI controller or any of that stuff. I would just drag samples in and just move them around so they fit. So as you can imagine, this is a tedious process, but I was so amazed at the ability to be able to do this. I didn't care how much time it was taking me. It was just so fun and fulfilling to be able to actually have these songs and eventually start sharing them with people. But there was no releasing, there was none of that. It was just songs I was just doing. I was just making them just to make them and enjoying the process. So then fast forward to 2016. I had a friend that I had met through another worship leader at a local church here when I was on staff at a church here. And he, for whatever reason, saw something in me and the songs I shared with him. And he started to actually kind of give me some direction and started kind of putting some goals in front of me. And one of those goals was to pitch a 3-song demo to a couple of people that he knew in Nashville. And to me, for one, this is the first time that anybody had really said, hey, like, why don't we start to develop this? Because it was always just this random thing I did. And, I would work on these songs all the time. This is pre-kids, newly married. It was basically I was either working or I was kind of hanging out with Susie or I was working on some music. So that was it. But this is the first time someone outside of my family or, close friends was like, hey, like, let's do something. So I started digging into that. And more, then I had a sounding board. I would send him what I was working on and be like, let's try this, let's try that, but actually getting some feedback. So that was so valuable because, of course, when you send your songs to your mom, it's the greatest thing that, has ever happened. But we know that that's probably not true, especially it definitely wasn't true for me. It could be true for you because you are amazing. But for me, it was a lot of effort and a lot of trial and error. And again, I'm still learning the recording process as I go. I mean, I'm still learning it today, but especially then I'm still learning how to like actually record things and not have them completely distorted, and very basic stuff that we all need to know to be able to create great sounding music. So then through that process, we had kind of worked on songs. At a point, I was creating a song demo with vocals and writing it as I went. Almost once a week, I was completing a demo. Now, this is definitely a demo. It wasn't fully fleshed out or release ready or anything like that, but it was for a few months in a row. I created probably 4 or 5 songs a month for, honestly, it could have been like a year. So it was a lot of songs. And these are songs that no one has heard and no one will hear. And to be honest, I haven't even listened to them in a while, but they're all a part of the journey, all a part of the routine and the habit of just creating music over and over again to refine your skills. So eventually, somewhere along the way, I decided that I needed to upgrade to Logic, because Logic is just like GarageBand, only it's the pro version of GarageBand. It's always been $200 in the App Store, super easy to get. And honestly, if you're just starting out, I would almost recommend just starting with Logic. I know it's a bit of an investment, but truthfully, it has every plugin already built in and multiple plugins. I mean, you can buy plugins that are way more than $200, and that's just one plugin to do one thing. Logic has everything built into it. So, and GarageBand does too. So if, don't feel pressured by that, like you have to get Logic. You don't. But I would say if I was starting from scratch, I would just start with Logic, so that way I kind of know and I can kind of start with that full suite of all the amazing things that Logic has to offer. So at some point in that process, I think it was when I was doing those weekly songs, I did get Logic, and I had a basic knowledge of it just because, it's just like with all Apple products, each product kind of stems from the last. So I kind of had the general flow. But through that process, the ironic part is that we actually never even ended up pitching those 3 songs to anybody. But there is a cool story that'll come back around in this story where those songs actually did. Not only did I not pitch them, but the person that we were planning to pitch it to, about a year or 2 later, actually asked me for 3 songs of stuff I was working on. So that's just how God works sometimes, is he always will take these ideas, and it'll almost never, in my experience, come exactly the way that I planned. And honestly, at this point, I don't even want things to happen the way that I plan, because when God does things, they're so much better and way more fulfilling than I could ever even dream up. So in all my recordings, it led me to find this podcast called the Full Circle Music Show, which was the first version of the Full Circle Music podcast, hosted by Seth Mosley, an incredible songwriter that has done huge things and has been a great champion for me in my journey personally. So I found that podcast in that 2016 time frame, and they started talking about this thing they held called a boot camp, which was like a live event in Nashville. I'd never been in Nashville. I'd never even thought to go to Nashville, because I always figured that Nashville is a place where legitimate songwriters and artists lived. And since I was not one of those, why would I go there? So through that process, eventually I got this email one day. I don't even remember when it was. It was 2017 at some point, and it was like, hey, we saw that you signed up for this boot camp waiting list. We don't have that next thing scheduled, but we're doing this thing we're calling the Secret Songwriters Retreat. And if you're interested, let us know and we'll give you all the information. So I remember reading that email, and God was like, you're going to be there. And I was like, nope, not me. You got the wrong guy. But this is the voice I'm hearing inside. So who else could you be talking to? So I ended up just extremely sheepishly and nervously saying, okay, I'm interested. And everything just worked out. And basically I went. And this is the first time I felt like I had walked into the music industry, and it was incredible. It was this amazing house, one of the first or second studios that Full Circle had, and walked to this house, got to see 11 of these other artists and songwriters doing exactly what I was doing, but also it was filled with industry professionals that these guys have hit songs, and there were some artists there, and it was just an incredible thing to walk into. And this is the first time in my life that I feel like I was in the music industry, and the most exciting part is I felt like I belonged. And I'd never experienced that, and I never thought that could even happen. So the result of that retreat was incredible. I got to write some songs with some amazing people, and it literally changed my life forever. But when I got home, obviously I was fueled up and I was fired up to do this thing. So I was really digging into Logic to write songs. I really was trying to take everything I had learned at that first retreat and write more and more better songs. But what I didn't realize is that all the while, God was developing my production skills, because I was using Logic a lot to write. There were some times where I didn't even write a song just in the room on acoustic. I was literally tracking it and recording as I went. So then I kept going. 2017, I actually went to another event. I went to Kingdom Songs, which was the Michael Farron event, which was incredible. Similar situation, a larger group, but so many people poured into me. And actually at that retreat, something happened that maybe it will seem small, and at the time, honestly, it seems small to me too, but it's something I've thought about a lot. So when part of the Kingdom Songs event was you could submit songs early, and then they would choose some of them to do a review in front of the room. But this was like with a panel of Nashville songwriters and publishers. So like legit people that actually, have worked for, Centricity and Word and all of these legit Nashville labels. So one of the songs I had submitted actually got picked to be reviewed. And this is actually horrifying to me because I'm a super introvert. This was in with all the attendees, and the panel of pros were on the stage, and they were going down the line after listening to, verse chorus of a song and giving their feedback. So I was like, I want this information so badly, but I really want to hide so much. So we went down the line, and there was I knew the people that were there, and Michael Farron gave me some great feedback. And then a really talented songwriter that I really looked up to named Jenny Lee Riddle was there, and she was on the panel. And one of the things she said was before she started, she was like, this sounds like you got to produce, so I don't want to hack it up too much because you probably invested some money into this, and I don't want you to have to go back and do that. And I told her, I'd actually, done the production myself. And she goes, "Oh, you're a producer." And I thought, am I a producer? Is that what this is? And it took me a long time to actually own up to that. But that was the first time that someone had called me a producer. For me, I was just writing songs and recording in my house just to get the songs out. But what I realized is that, like I said, God was doing this the whole time, is that I became a producer. And it took somebody that objectively heard a song for the first time. I had never met, Jenny Lee at all. I heard of her. She wrote a really famous song in the church called Revelation Song, which is an incredible song that, to me is like a modern day hymn. So I knew and was very aware of her, but for her to say that to me was like, wow, that is, a game changer for me. So not that I came home and started saying in my Instagram bio that I'm a producer, that took a long time because the imposter syndrome was telling me, oh yeah, well, obviously I just got lucky on that one song, and whatever the case may be. But eventually I realized that yes, if you make music from home, you're a producer, and it's okay to call yourself a producer. If you write music, it's okay to call yourself a songwriter because you are a songwriter. If you write songs, you're a songwriter. Just because you don't have any hits or just because you don't have any major album credits, that doesn't mean that you're not a songwriter or a producer. All you have to do it is to be it. So if you're doing it, then start thinking about that. Start calling yourself, start identifying yourself as a producer. Start identifying yourself as an artist and a songwriter. It's not just something to boost yourself up and try to elevate your ego. I mean, this is a real thing that you can identify yourself in that. And honestly, I feel like when you do that, if you're not doing that already, it's going to actually really help you own up and get clarity on your vision, because once you can identify what you're doing, then you can kind of know where to go with it, and you can kind of get in your lane, because the sooner you can get in your lane, the sooner you can start accomplishing things on your path. So that was 2017. I actually went to another Kingdom Songs in the beginning of 2018. And then through that process, I really was digging into production more and more for my own stuff. I was working on a lot of music. And eventually, Susie was like, hey, why do you think about releasing some of this music? And I was like, releasing it? I'm just making it to write songs. And I know it might seem like I'm being super naive, but truthfully, this is how it went. Like I've never had like these huge goals, these lofty goals for down the road. I just do things as I feel inspired to do them and then kind of see where they go. And so far, that's kind of brought me to a pretty cool path that's brought us even to here to this podcast today, where now we're, getting to impact people through this and then all the other content. And then, like I said, we just launched a course. So all these things have just sort of happened naturally along the way. But I feel like that's all and only because giving God the yes and then letting him do what he's made me. And the same story is for you to do. So 2018, I was like, okay, let's start trying to figure out how to release this music. I've only burned CDs and sold them out of the trunk of a car in the band days. How do you get this on like Spotify and streaming platforms? So I dug really, really deep into YouTube, like I always do, and kind of started finding some strategies and how to use a digital distributor and how to get music out. And so in September I think it was September 7th of 2018, I released my first EP called In the Meantime. And that had 5 songs on it. It was really exciting. It was really cool to go through that process and upload. I used CD Baby for that one. And then ever since then, I've been using DistroKid because one of the things that I learned is that the singles was the thing to do. And this is back in 2018. So this wasn't such a normalized release strategy just yet. So I released that in September. And then I just decided that I needed to release a single song every month until I ran out of songs. And so the recording of this is in August of 2021, and I've still been doing that. Every 4 to 6 weeks, I've been releasing a song ever since 2018, the fall of 2018. So I haven't run out of songs yet. I don't know if I ever will. I hope not, because I love doing this. So through that process, though, through going through that and starting to release self-produced music, there's no better way to figure out how to get better than by doing it. I'm so big into that, and I know I say it all the time, but the best way to figure out how to do something is by doing it. Now, when I listen back to those recordings, and honestly, even the newer recordings, I'm like, oh man, I wish I would have done that different. But I'm so glad that it's out. I'm so glad that it's making impact, because some of those songs, actually, that one of the songs off that first EP, which, side note, is the intro for the CIAS podcast. That little song that you hear at the beginning and the end of each episode is from my song Nobody, which is the first song off that EP. But that song in particular has got swept up into some algorithmic Spotify playlists. I mean, it has over 100,000 streams. And even more exciting than that, I can track what playlist is on. I've seen it on pre-service playlists for churches I've never been to. I've seen it on some wedding pre-service playlists. I've seen it on dance and exercise playlists, and it's been all over the place. But if I hadn't put it out, if I would have just waited and said, no, I'm not good enough, or I'm not a producer, I'm not a songwriter, then that song wouldn't be making the impact it is. And again, it's great impact for me. It's not getting millions of streams. It's not charting. It's not doing anything crazy comparatively, but to me, it doesn't matter. And I don't think to God, it matters either. He's going to do what he's going to do with it. We just have to do our part and get it out there. So like I said, every month since then, I've been releasing a single a month. And these have been a lot of the songs actually that I wrote at those retreats ended up being releases, which is really cool to share those co-writing experiences. So I did that. And then eventually I started releasing enough music, and then people started asking me to record their music, or if I could. And I was like, sure, we could do that. We could try it. And this is early on. So, at first we're working remotely. So it was like, how does it even work? How do I get people's vocals? Because again, this is back 2018, where it wasn't quite as common for people to have little recording setups at their house where they could record vocals. Everyone was still used to going to the studio. So we just started doing that and had some gracious artists that I started working with early on. It was great. It was a great process. And that kept kind of going and kept kind of going. And then there was a time in the beginning of 2019 where we were pretty close to, and by pretty close, I mean one email away from moving to Nashville from Florida, selling everything, selling our house, moving our 2 kids and Susie and I to Nashville to go after an opportunity that had been presented for us. And we thought that's what we were supposed to do. That was the call. But then that opportunity actually didn't end up panning out the way that we thought it might. So we were like, okay, God, we felt that urging to do something. We felt that push. We felt that call. Okay, well, that wasn't it. So then what is it? And 2, at this time, I'm still working at the church. I'd worked at the church, local church here, from February of 2014, and this is all the way in 2019. So all of this stuff that I'm saying in this whole story, I'm doing all these things usually at night. I'd work at church all day, and then I'd get home and we'd do family, we'd do dinner, and the kids would go to bed. And we had really young kids at the time. So I'd come in here. Actually, at the time, beginning, the studio was in my son's room. That is my son's room now. And I would just plug in and I'd start working on music from 8 to 11, 8 to 12. The problem is sometimes I'd get so excited about the song is I couldn't go to sleep because I'd be all adrenaline, because I just love the power of being able to create music. So with that, 2019 comes around. We're like, okay, God, we didn't move to Nashville. Okay, what is it? And then a bunch of stuff happened. And then we got this urging, we got this call from a few different times. This verse kept showing up out of Isaiah. And basically it says, expand the place of your meeting, stretch out your tent pegs wide. And I was like, okay, God, I'm not a camper. I'm not a happy camper. Like, what do I do with that? And we thought maybe that was the move to Nashville. We're like, moving. That's how we stretch out our tent pegs. That's how we open up bigger. But that wasn't it. Okay. So then what? And this is not something that we've shared a lot, but then we got pregnant. But then Susie miscarried, and it was really hard. And we thought, okay, well, that was the reason that we didn't go to Nashville, because we're going to have a new baby. We need to be around family. But then that didn't happen either. So we're like, God, what do we do? Where do we go from here? So then we had this idea, okay, we have some people that are wanting to work with us on production. Maybe we expand what we're doing here in our tent that we already live in. But how do we do that? What can we do? We can't, build on our house. What are we going to do? So then the space that I'm in right now to my left was this is a Florida room. And if you're not from Florida room is basically really common. And it's essentially when houses are built in Florida, they always have some sort of back porch, usually back in the day. But then to make the houses larger, they would enclose it and then build another porch on the back of that. So the Florida room is like the old porch. But with that, there's a large, just to my left here, there's a big open space that was where the sliding glass doors were to outside. We're like, okay, well, what if we put some French doors up and close off the space and actually make it like a dedicated spot in our house? Changing our house might seem like a small thing, but to us, it was like, wow, we're going to spend money and buy doors and then pay someone to put them in and all that stuff. Like we're going to dedicate to that, and we're like, well, yeah. So then had a guy at church. Obviously, this is how God works. It just like super easy came together. Even when we went, I think we actually bought the doors in Father's Day weekend of 2019, and it just happened to be like a Father's Day sale where it was like this huge discount. Of course, that's how God does it. When we're on the right path, then God will just even the nitty gritty details. God is just there, and He's just going to make it work, and it's going to blow your mind, but it will work when you get in the path. So we put the doors up. And this was like, I think it finished like July 4th weekend of 2019. And then that next week, we had 4 or 5 artists reach out to us. Of course, no one knew about the doors. I mean, we might have posted about the doors, but it wasn't like, who cares? It's just doors. People do that stuff all the time. But we had 4 or 5 artists from all over the world literally reach out to us and like, hey, will you produce my next single? And honestly, that was 2019, and we've been going ever since, been growing ever since. And in March of 2020, we were able to go full time into producing music for other people. And through that process, this podcast was born because the main vision of Brian Bolivar Music is to help Christian indie artists and songwriters just like you get songs heard. I know you hear me say that all the time, but that is the purpose. So that means everything that we do filters through that. So that might be doing artist production work. That might be serving you in this podcast. That might be serving you in our Facebook group where you can connect and build community with others. That might be in this brand new course that we just launched. That might be through our CIAS playlist. That might be through a CIAS retreat that we host once a year. Whatever that looks like, it all filters through helping Christian indie artists and songwriters just like you get songs heard. That brings us up to 2020, and all of these things that we've been doing ever since have just all been a part of that start way back in 2006, where I first started to try and record into that Dell computer. And that moved into getting GarageBand and starting to do a little bit more intentional production. And then that moved into my friend urging me to do something with this. And then that moved into getting Logic. And then that moved to going to Nashville and getting to step into the music industry. And then that moved to releasing music. And then that moved to doing work for other artists. And then that brings us to today, which is honestly, like I said, blows my mind of all the things that God has elevated and done through this little idea, this little thing where I would just record songs into a computer just because I felt like I needed to and I wanted to. And that was the way to get it out. And I bet you that you feel the same way. And I know that you can do it. And I hope that this story has sort of shown you that it's really nothing special. I didn't do anything. I didn't have an ability that God just gave me to be able to do this. Sure, there's talent involved, but really, I hope that this story showed you that it's just doing it over and over again. I say I've done it hundreds of times. I have no way to count. It could be thousands of times, to be honest. Like there's no way to quantify or know exactly how many times it's been, but it all starts with one. Every great journey begins with one step. And I hope that this encourages you and reminds you that you can do it no matter how far along the journey you are, whether you're just starting or you're just thinking about producing or you've been producing longer than I have. You are still so able and capable of doing so much more as we give God all of the attention and all of the glory and just let Him do His thing, because it takes so much work off. There's been so many long days. There's been so many long nights for us as we've been building this company and doing our best to serve people any way we can. But it's always worth it, because if it's all God's anyway, then He's the one who's going to brunt all of the work. I heard this great quote just the other day, and it was basically like something like this: do things today that your future self will thank you for. And what does that mean? That means that in 2 years from now, 6 months from now, 10 years from now, what you do today, will that make your future self thankful? Because it takes so much time to do things. My future self is so thankful that I decided to open up GarageBand for the first time in 2010, because that's led us to where we are now in 2021. But that's 11 years ago. And if I hadn't done that, who knows where we'd be? It doesn't matter, because this is where God has called us to be. And your story is not the same as mine. Your story is different. I just hope that my story will show you that you're not alone in this. And with that, if you ever have any questions at all, or you'd like to share your story, leave a comment below if you're watching here on YouTube, or send me an email. Go to our website, brianbolivarmusic.com, send me an email, and just let me know. How has your production journey been? How can I help you on it? Is it a course? Is it the free Record Your Vocals Like a Pro module that you can download? Just click the link below. You get instant access to that. And it's not for any other reason than to try to help you on your journey, because I know that you can do this and I'm here to help. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to subscribe if you're here on YouTube. Click the bell icon so you don't miss the next video. And we will see you next Friday at 5 a.m. Eastern.